Um, how is it that the two pieces against each other, with you blowing into them, how do they actually create sound?
Well,
What is
you know,
actually happening there? Are you causing them to vibrate against each other?
exactly. That's exactly what happens. Like on that one that's not done yet,
Hmm.
it's not vibrating because it's
Hmm.
not thin enough.
Hmm.
So like here's a finished reed.
Aha.
You can kind of see it's got different thicknesses.
Right. Very thin
And
at the
then
edge.
right. So you can put it you blow into it and then the reeds wiggle inside your
Hmm.
mouth and then that's what produces the sound. But
Right.
you think of the oboe as being this kind of soulful, mournful sound and I mean that doesn't really evoke that, but it's the oboe that, makes it all
Well,
work.
it's soulful. It's full of anxiety. Let,
What do you
let,
mean?
let me ask you this. Inquiring minds
Yeah,
want to know. Can you
sure.
tell from what you just did, blowing in a reed, if it's going to sound good in the oboe or not? Can you tell without
Yes.
the oboe?
Yes, I can actually. And
Hmm.
that brings me actually to a little bit to teaching because you see, I work on all of my students' reads and I want them to make their own reads. And so I help
Right.
them with the process normally. But now I can't touch the reads anymore. I don't even
Oh,
see them in person anymore.
right.
So that sound, that crow, the my student can crow the reed and I can hear that and I can say, "Oh, you need to do such and such or you need to do
Right.
such and such." Cuz like that one demo read that's not done. I don't know if I can get it to work. Well, that just tells me it's hard and it's not vibrating.
I see.
But I don't know if you really want it. Oh, I'm going to do it anyway. So, I kind of like a reed that vibrates but it's going to sound like a dying goose. It'll
Hmm.
crow more like that. But a good reed will crow more like it'll have octaves, but it'll be more
I see.
contained sounding.
I
So
see.
it's
Could you show us what you showed us before when you shared the screen? You showed us
oh yeah,
all the
sure.
various, because just for
Yes.
us to process all that, I think is quite
Right?
extreme. My goodness.
So that's just and this is all like the stuff that you don't have to do. This is just I like having more quality control because there's that whole control freak
Right.
thing that might go along with oboe as well.
Now, why do you
But
say you
here
don't have to do it?
oh, well, you could buy cane
I see.
um
I see.
easily.
Yeah.
You can buy cane and do it that way, but it starts to become cost prohibitive just
I
because
see.
of how many reads we have to make. But so these are pictures actually of my students' reads. Can you see them when I'm
Yeah.
changing?
Yep.
So what's been really helpful is if they take a picture, and then send it to me on their phones, I can say, oh, okay, so now see you need a little bit more out here, or
Hmm.
I can tell them exactly like this was a disaster. This one
Uh-huh.
needs a coffin because that unfortunately has a big crack in it.
Uh,
So mishaps happen. Or there's a little tear. But the funny thing is with my students' reads is that they get really obsessed on whether they have corners or not.
uh-huh.
But any bad reed can have corners. It's more about the different thicknesses and thinnesses in the tip
Mm.
and the proportion of it. It's basically like a tightrope walk between getting the darn thing to vibrate but not having it vibrate too much.
Wow. And at
So
what point in someone's learning process as an oboist would they start learning to make reeds? There you
well,
are.
usually I have my students start maybe around like 12 or 13.
Hmm.
And usually the only thing I have them worry about at first is just making the blank, getting the cane. I mean, it is kind of archaic when you think about it. Like,
Right.
we are getting this piece of wood onto this metal tube with thread,
Aha.
and those sides have to seal and they can't leak because already the oboe takes too much air in terms of we already have a passing out kind of reputation. So that so I mean that's kind of crazy when you think about it. Like, so when my students are like, what, we have to do what? But like I said, I mean, personally, I wasn't kicked out of the reed making nest until I was a sophomore at Eastman School of Music,
Aha.
with Richard Kilmer. And so in college, that's when I was
Hmm.
fully like all the freshmen sounded amazing at Eastman because Mr. Kilmer would give them a read. Every now and then you'd be like, oh, because he's like the king of read making, as anyone who studies with him knows. But then sophomore year, you wouldn't get any more reads. And so then, oh, you know, but
Ah,
my students have just been kicked out of the nest because of quarantine at
right.
age 12 or age 15 or age 17.
You say
So,
age 12, but how many years have they been practicing oboe at age 12?
well, usually most of my students start around 10.
I see.
So lots of times I kind of introduce the read making really slowly, but now we've all had to go full throttle
Right.
with read
Now,
making.
a couple of weeks ago, we talked to Bobby Everson, and he showed us that he had at least 32 pairs of mallets, all of which made different sounds on the timpani.
That's pretty
None of
cool.
which, as far as I know, he made himself. But I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I wonder if is there any way you could demonstrate how different reeds will sound different, maybe even in the oboe?
Sure.
Yeah,
The only problem with this is the limitations of Zoom in terms of the
yeah,
sound.
of course.
That's something I've been battling with my teaching actually because um, I actually have something I've been working with called Clean Feed, and
Hmm.
that it's free that I use along with Zoom, and it sounds a little bit better. But what I
Uh-huh.
have found from teaching is I can't hear vibrato
I
and
see.
I can't hear diminuendos. So
And you
every
need
once in a
those.
while, yeah, every once in a while I'll have a student send me a video because it sounds so much better on a video recording. Because
Sure.
Zoom is designed for talking, and it's been really great.
Right.
But when you think about it, oboe, I mean, what is like oboe in speech? Kind of just screaming, and
Yeah,
nobody wants to hear screaming
I
on Zoom.
know.
So, but here are three reads, and I don't know if you'll be
Great.
able to tell the
And
difference, but
yeah, maybe we'll hear something different, even if we don't hear the accurate sound.
yeah. So I'll play, I don't know, like so that's one, and
Can
then
anybody out there name that tune, by the way? That's probably my very favorite oboe solo.
right. Whoa, maybe not on this one.
So it seems like to get a sound out of that one, you need more air.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's actually a better read, but it took me by surprise when I first played it.
Uh-huh.
And now this one's newer, so it's a little bit. Well, I shouldn't tell you until after you hear it. Ooh,
Okay, well, I think we can definitely hear a difference. So here's an interesting question.
cool.
Let's say you're
Yeah.
playing along in the orchestra pit, right? Or even on
Mm-hmm.
stage, and there's a
Sure.
reed mishap. You have a reed malfunction, and you quickly have to switch reeds. So you've got to put a reed in, but it's in mid piece. The
Mm-hmm.
music is going. You don't have a chance to really test it. And your next solo is coming up in 10 seconds. What do you do? How do you guess how much air you're going to need, or how you're going to need to approach that new read?
Well, it's funny because we basically assume that that's going to happen every performance. That it's interesting you say that. Like I always, we just at any one time, any read will go down. So when I'm trying reads before a performance, I'll always narrow it down to two or three, and maybe
Yeah.
I've narrowed it down to like six before going
Okay.
to the hall, and then I narrow it down to two or three. But I always have the read I'm playing on and the backup read that can take over in any time. And
I
then of
see.
course there's the whole degree of you can't under soak it and you can't over soak it. So then you have to know how much soaking each read needs or doesn't need.
I
So
see.
you're right. Um, and the thing is if you were coming in on a big solo, you just have to rely on faith that you know what you're doing, and also we train for those kind of those problems having to happen,
Yeah.
and um, right now I don't have performance uh, worst case scenario chops per se. Like I basically have teaching chops right now,
Right, right. Of course.
in terms of how the strength of my face. Like I started making reads because I got bored. I actually didn't make any reads for the first month because I didn't need to, and I probably typically make over 100 reads a month. And I think
Wow.
since quarantine, I've made about eight.
I see. Like you said, you don't need them immediately, but it's great to keep those chops up, right? But
Right.
thinking about the worst case scenario, I think I remember seeing recently a video where an oboist, I believe it was a piece
Oh
by
yeah.
Berlioz, right? Where,
Yes. Yeah, that
yeah,
one's hilarious.
you tell what happened.
Oh, just I can't remember. Was it Vienna or Berlin? I don't remember. But basically, what happened is, uh, the oboist got water in his octave vent,
Yeah.
right? And so he tried to smack it to make it go out because he was doing a beautiful solo. And what happens when you get condensation in your octave vent, like right here, is that you'll go to play and you'll be like, ah, and it'll go like that, and you're like, ah. And the thing is, it's not anything that is your fault. It is
Uh-huh.
completely like reed making. If your reed's bad, that's your fault. But water, you can't control condensation. We do everything we can to try to control it. So anyway, he went bop bop like this to try to knock the condensation out, but
Right.
in doing that he broke his reed. And
Whoa.
then he went to play and there was no sound, and so he grabbed the second oboe player's oboe and just started playing and didn't miss a
Which
beat. So
which these days probably wouldn't be a very good idea, but but back then
oh,
in
that's
simpler
true.
times, yeah, you could do that. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that's one of
Amazing.
our that's one of our dirty little secrets actually in the oboe world is lots of times we play in each other's reeds. So I don't know if we're going to be doing that anymore.
Yeah,
And
very
I've
interesting.
I've
But speaking of that, what if someone you know makes a fantastic read that just works perfectly for you? Could you pay them to make reads for you? Do oboists do that? Pay someone to make their reads for them?
some of them do, but the
Yeah.
going rate for a reed that would be on par with what I'd expect for myself would be about $30 each.
Oh, wow. I see.
And if I'm playing it for 6 hours,
Yeah.
I mean that's one day of ballet rehearsals or something.
Right. That's
That
$5 an hour. That's a lot. Um, yeah.
and everyone's mouth is different, everyone's air is different,
Hmm.
everyone's open. Like I make when I play on different oboes, I make different reeds.
I
If
got you.
I'm, you know what I mean? So it's almost like you kind of have to do it yourself just because I will make the best reed for myself that I can, and
Right.
nobody else can make the best Erica read. For does that make sense? Like it's kind of like being true to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.